Hello, my dear friends. I hope you are well and your Pesach preparations are going well and are in order. The opening phrase in the Parsha, Vayikra el Moshe, God called to Moshe. It's well known that the word Vayikra, which is spelled with an Aleph at the end of the word, in the Chumash appears with a small Aleph. This is known as an Aleph Ze'ira. And there's many, many different explanations why that is so. There's a sefer called Megal Amukos that has 100 explanations on the small aleph. One of the most famous explanations is that of the Baal HaTurim, who writes the following. Rashi says that Vayikra is a lashon chavivus. It's a language of love, of intimacy. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he speaks to the Jewish prophets, Vayikra, which means that with definitive intention, God spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. He called out to Moshe to speak to him. There's another word that's very similar to Vayikra, and that's Vayakar. Vayakar is Vayikra without an aleph, is Vayakar. And when God speaks to Bilam, the Chumash says Vayakar el Bilam. That God, Vayakar means he happened upon Bilam. And the Rashi says that's the contrast between Moshe and Bilam. Moshe was with Vayikra, with a call, which showed love and affection, whereas Bilam is Vayakar. He just so happened that he bumped into Bilam and he decided to talk to him. It's happenstance, and that's the distinction between Moshe Rabbeinu and Bilam. So the Baal HaTurim says Moshe Rabbeinu was Chumash says he was Anav Mikol Adam. He was the most modest person in the world. When Moshe was writing the Torah, God said you should write the phrase. God dictated the Torah, and He says write Vayikra el Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu was upset. He felt, I'm undeserving that it should say Vayikra, but for myself, Moshe wanted to write Vayakar, the same way that with Bilam, Vayakar, God happened to appear to Bilam. Moshe wanted God happened to appear to him. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu insisted that he had to write Vayikra. So Moshe, he agreed to write Vayikra, but he tried to hide the Vayikra. He wrote the Aleph small, so that somebody, if he doesn't pay close attention, will think that it says Vayakar, because Moshe thought he's not deserving of more. He felt God happens to speak to him, but he didn't feel that he was deserving that God should address him as Vayikra. So here's a terrific lesson that we could extract from this. It's not uncommon that a person who is a big Talmud Chacham, or very learned, or somebody who's a communal leader, or a person who gives a lot of tzedakah and chesed, that a person should feel, who deserves honor more than me? I'm much more important for the community than others. I'm much more knowledgeable. I'm more chashuv than other individuals. What we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu is that if a person thinks that he's more chashuv, then he's less chashuv, then he's less important. Because great people think that they are unworthy and undeserving. That's the model of Moshe Rabbeinu. Who would be more deserving of Vayikra than Moshe? Moshe, after all, spent 40 days with HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Har Sinai. And Moshe Rabbeinu, Rashi says, Vayikra el Moshe. Moshe was the only one that heard God calling. God called out, and Rashi says it was not in a quiet voice, it was in God's booming voice. But that, nonetheless, the only one in all of all creation that heard the call was Moshe Rabbeinu. So who would be more deserving of Vayikra with an Aleph than Moshe Rabbeinu? But it was B'dafka Moshe that felt that it should be Vayakar because of his mind. It wasn't false modesty. It was because he felt he's undeserving. He thought it should be Vayakar. This is in stark contrast to Haman. When Haman came to see Achashverosh in the middle of the night, and Achashverosh read about how Mordechai had saved him from the hands of Bigsan and Teresh. So Achashverosh said to Haman, what can we do with somebody that the king wants to honor? So what does Haman say? Haman said in his heart, Achashverosh didn't say who he wants to honor. But Haman said, who would the king want to honor more than me? Of all the people, of course, he wants to honor me. I'm the greatest person in the kingdom. Of course he wants to honor me. That's the antithesis of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was the most deserving, he wanted to write Vayakar. So he should be on the same level as Bilam, where God just happened to appear to him. But Haman, he thought, I'm the most important person in the kingdom. Miha ish chafetz bikar yosimeni. And a person who's a Talmud Chacham, or about Staka, or about Chesed, or a communal leader, that thinks that way, if he thinks, Lumi hamelech, who's more deserving in honor than I am, then that shows that the person is actually not as great as he thinks. There's a terrific story about Rabbi Akiva Eger and Rabbi Yaakov Melisa. Rabbi Akiva Eger was the Rav in Posen, and in the beginning of the 1800s. And Rabbi Yaakov Lisa was one of, and Rabbi Akiva Eger were two of the Gedolei Yisrael. They wrote many famous Svarim, which are still learned by Talmidei Chachamim with great interest even till this very day. Rabbi Yaakov Lisa wrote a letter to Rabbi Akiva Eger. They wanted to come and visit him in Posen. So Rabbi Akiva Eger was excited that Rabbi Yaakov was honoring the city with his visit. So when the appointed time came for Rabbi Yaakov Lisa to come to Posen, so Rabbi Akiva Eger told the people that were having such a distinguished guest. So they took a wagon. In those days they didn't have limousines. They took a chariot with horses, and they went out to greet Rav Yaakov before he came into the city. So Rabbi Akiva Eger was sitting in the wagon, and he was waiting to greet his dear friend Rav Yaakov Melisa. So finally, the Rav Yaakov was approached from the other end, and he went into the Rabbi Akiva Eger greeted him, and they went to sit together inside the wagon. Rabbi Akiva Eger is sitting on one side in the carriage, and Rav Yaakov is sitting on the other side. So as the wagon was being led by the horses back to the city, the people said, "Why do we have to let the horses have the honor of pulling these two Gedolei Yisrael? We'll do it ourselves." So they unhitched the horses, and they were dancing and singing and carrying the carriage with their own weight as they made their way towards the city. So Rav Yaakov Melisa saw that there was all these people were dancing and singing, and that they had unhitched the horses to show kavod. So he figured, who are they showing kavod to? It must be for my dear friend Rabbi Akiva Eger. So he quietly slipped out his side of the carriage, and he joined the throngs of the people that were pulling the wagon with Rabbi Akiva Eger. In the meantime, Rabbi Akiva Eger saw the same thing, that people were dancing and singing, and he figured, who are they honoring? They're honoring my dear Chaver, Rabbi Yaakov Melisa. So Rabbi Akiva Eger slipped out the other side, unbeknownst to him that his Chaver had slipped out of the carriage already. So and Rabbi Akiva Eger joined the throngs of the people that were dancing and singing and pulling the carriage. So here you had the carriage was empty, and you had the two Gedolei Yisrael, Rabbi Akiva Eger and Rabbi Yaakov Melisa, were both carrying the carriage together with the throngs of the people as they danced toward the city. When they finally came to the city and the people opened the door of the carriage, they saw that the carriage was empty. And lo and behold, the two Gedolei Yisrael were amongst the crowd. They were helping to carry the carriage. So the people said that the carriage is not empty. The carriage is carrying the great, outstanding midos of Gedolei Yisrael. So here, it's such a beautiful story. Each one, instead of thinking, who are they honoring if not me? I'm such a great person. On the contrary, Rabbi Akiva Eger thought that they're honoring Rabbi Yaakov Melisa. Rabbi Yaakov Melisa thought they were honoring Rabbi Akiva Eger. There's a great story about Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was one of the Gedolim, passed away about 40 years ago. He was in his 90s when he passed away. He was a very great individual, tremendous Talmud Chacham. He was a Rav in Toronto before he came to America. In fact, Barry Wolf's mother, Aleh Shalom, worked as a secretary for Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky in Toronto. So after Rav Yaakov left Toronto, once a year he would come back to Toronto to pay a special visit to his shul that he loved so much and so dearly. So Rav Yaakov once came into the shul, and there was a person by the name of Yankel who was making a siyum on a masechta. So when it was time to make the siyum, the Rabbi gave a clap on the table, and he said, Yankel will now make a siyum on this Masechta. Rav Yaakov heard the announcement, Yankel will make a siyum, and he thought they were talking about him, even though would have been disrespectful to refer to him as Yankel. And each time the Rav Yaakov came to the community, when they introduced him, there was like a 15-minute elaborate introduction. They talked about all his accolades and his outstanding and sterling qualities. But when the Rabbi gave a clap and he said, Yankel is going to make a siyum, who thought that they're talking about him? Rav Yaakov. So he jumps up and he says, but he protests. He says, I don't deserve this honor. I didn't finish the Masechta. I can't make the siyum. So that's the sign of a Gadol Yisrael. That he didn't think, wow, they're calling me Yankel. That's a chutzpah. He thought the Yankel, that must be him. They're calling him by his name, Yankel. And he protested that he's not worthy of making a siyum. So what we see is that if a person feels a sense of superiority, then the person better check his tzitzis, because that means that he's really inferior, because he's arrogant, and arrogant in the Torah world, or in the world of Yahadus, is the antithesis of the way a observant Jew is supposed to be. A person is supposed to have a sense of humility and undeserving credit. Not that I deserve the credit. Like, that's the quality of Haman. Who does the king want to honor more than me? But a Jew who is dedicated and devoted always feels a sense of inadequacy. He compares himself to other great people, and he compares himself to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and he feels, I'm nobody important, I'm nobody special. And that is the quality that we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, that it was only under great protest that Moshe even agreed to write Vayikra with an Alef, but he did so reluctantly that he wrote an Al Zira with a small Alef at the end of the word Vayikra.